Hi, everyone. My name is Tomasz Tunguz. I'm your host today for Office Hours. This is a program where we invite luminaries from all over the software world to share their insights. It's a unique format where we gather questions from the audience ahead of time, weave them into weave them into the conversation, and have founders and execs ask questions along the way. It's been a huge success. Recent guests include Lee Kirkpatrick, who is CFO at Twilio, Lars Nilsson, who is VP Sales Development at Snowflake, and most recently, Bill Binch. Today, we've gathered questions from the audience. We've got more than 700 people registered to attend, an absolutely incredible turnout. The format of the session is going to be, we're going to spend 30 to 35 minutes for a fireside chat, and then we'll open it up to questions more broadly, so about 45 to 50 minutes in all. Please use the questions feature or the chat on the side, and I'll be monitoring those and interjecting them for the conversation with Carilu. We are recording the session, and so we'll be publishing it later on. So today I have the great pleasure to welcome Carilu Dietrich. Carilu is one of the most thoughtful marketers I've ever met. We connected earlier this year, it's true. We had a couple of different debates and conversations, and so I invited her on to the show. She's got this unusual combination, and I think really exceptional combination. She started her career at Oracle, and we're going to jump in with that story at the beginning, and then has become an expert in the PLG motion, starting with Atlassian, but today she advises many of the PLG companies that we all know best, Miro, 1Password, Bill.com, and others. So Carilu, thank you so much for coming on Office Hours. Thrilled to have you on the show.
Thanks so much. And I'm a hyper fan of yours. I read your blog and promote it all the time. So thank
Of
you for
course.
that
Well,
nice compliment.
let's get started. So um, today we're going to cover a couple of different topics, but the first one I really want to jump into is this, and we were talking a bit about yesterday, but PLG versus enterprise. And where I'd love to start with you is I'd love to hear about your experience at Oracle. What happened there? You were managing a large budget, went through a recession, the team shrank. We were kind of having this conversation, but I'd love for you to share it with the audience, and then we'll go in and talk about your PLG journey.
Yep, sure. And I'm going to go back even farther because I actually started my career as an enterprise sales rep. Well, kind of an inside salesperson before an enterprise sales rep. But I sold internet infrastructure for UUNet, which was kind of we provided 65% of the internet in 2000. And so I cut my teeth trying to do account-based marketing to, 3 or 4 accounts that bought more than $1 million a year. At the time, it was Yahoo, Advanced Micro Devices, and Intuit. And so I got screwed on a sales deal and moved into marketing because I thought they were the ones who made the decisions. I had sold a product and marketing had canned the product. And I was like, I'm going into the head of the octopus because in sales, I'm getting whipped around. And so I moved through a number of different marketing roles, closer to the product marketing, coming up through product marketing, but also demand gen. And then my company, the company I worked for, Plumtree, was acquired by BEA, which was acquired by Oracle. And I sold myself into the advertising department as an expert in product, because one of the things I think is most important about advertising and marketing and PLG is how good the message is. If you don't understand the audience, if you're not telling them something that's differentiated and interesting, you can spend all the money in the world and it's going to waste. So I sold myself into the Oracle advertising department and ran all awareness advertising. So I wrote print ads for the front page of the Wall Street Journal and the back page of The Economist. I ran all of the global airports. We did all the online and ultimately ended up doing all the online, the Google awareness, the banner ads, the demand generation campaigns. So a really big breadth, but with really tight messaging and advertising techniques, because Larry Ellison was personally involved and super opinionated. I'd worked with Jay Simons, who was the 10-year president of Atlassian, in 2 jobs before Oracle. And he asked repeatedly if I'd come over to Atlassian. I thought it was a career-limiting move, but I made a jump based on the people I knew. And it turned out to be a fantastic ride that took me from about 100 to almost 500 million in revenue. I got to put together and have a fantastic IPO and work for a really innovative company in a really special time.
It was really innovative. I remember at the time, I mean, the whole motion was so different, right? And you had seen sort of the contrast. I remember having a Twitter back and forth with the Atlassian founders about, no, I insisted, no, they needed to have people who were carrying quotas, but in reality, there was no one in the org in the early days carrying any kind of quota. It was one of the original PLG companies, wouldn't you say?
In so many ways. And in fact, the irony of my job now is the reason I'm an advisor to CEOs and CMOs of hypergrowth companies in this kind of 30 million to 500 million space is because when I was in the seat, there was no one that could help me organize my thoughts and give me our advice. And I was saying, we're growing so fast, we're doing something in a totally different way, and I don't know how to do this, and I don't know who to go to help me think it through. Because what Atlassian was doing was totally unconventional, and it goes back to the way it was structured. So it was bootstrapped. We didn't have investors. So we took some rounds to make early founders and early employees liquid. But the people that were on the board couldn't force a vote. And what's funny is every board meeting, they'd be like, okay, this experiment in PLG was cute. It's time for enterprise sales. And the founders would be like, nope, we're not ready. Because the whole structure of the company was based around spending the least possible in sales and marketing so they could spend the most possible in R&D. And I want to pull up those slides. I don't know, Tomasz, do you have those, or can I pull them up here? But I have some slides that were from, I think, 2020 data, but it was this similar data in 2016. I haven't looked at the earnings report last month, but we basically spent double what other people were spending on R&D and half of what other people were spending on sales and marketing. And what that allowed us to do was make a product that was so compelling that it sold itself. And then the whole model of the PLG model in selling itself is having easy access on the website. Nothing was gated, like no traditional marketing and trying to get people's emails and call them and have SDRs. Everything is focused on educating people as quickly as possible to get to the trial. And then we had this massive testing engine. So yeah, here's the data. We 15% on sales and marketing because there really was like not a significant sales team. We only used kind of some farming account management sales after like when they came to renewal and after a certain amount of money. Like you couldn't even talk to someone on the phone unless you already were paying more than $10,000 with Atlassian. And what that enabled us to do, to the next slide, was this massive investment in product. And when I talk to companies about PLG, the secrets to PLG are a product that's so amazing that people love to use. So they talk about it, they share it with other people on their team, and the flywheel of more sales comes more from the product being a word of mouth and technologically optimized viral engine than paying for all this advertising. When I spent $40 and $80 million at Oracle on advertising, sometimes it would change our share of voice in the market by like 1 or 2%. It's really expensive to pay to try to make people like you. And even if you pay, they still might not like you. Oh, Tomasz, you're on mute.
We're going to go this way and we'll go back. So one of the, I mean, we were having this conversation yesterday, Carilu, where it's like the idea behind PLG is you take those dollars that you used to spend on sales and marketing, and then now you're pumping them into research and development in order to make a product. And you had this brilliant insight where there are 5 pillars across that you think really lend themselves to PLG companies. Let me pull up that slide, and it'd be amazing for you to walk through it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. So first, it really starts with the amazing product, something that people really need at a time they need it. So Miro is a great example of a product that was overdue. We used to joke at Atlassian that the most uploaded file in Jira was photos of whiteboards. You get developers and they're drawing on whiteboards.
Sorry about that. Sorry, go ahead, Carilu. So you were talking about Miro, the most frequently uploaded. Yeah.
Uploaded document was whiteboards. People love whiteboards. But once you took a picture, you couldn't edit it. So, Miro came along and had a whiteboarding product, and Mural and some others as well, in the middle of COVID, when people were struggling with being remote and trying to not just do email and Slack, but collaborate on ideas in a free form manner. And so the product itself was something people needed that was easy to use, that then coming to the second item, has a low friction experience. And so a low friction experience starts with easy to educate yourself and get information. You don't have to call a sales rep and get a demo. You can see demos, you can see templates online, you can try the product yourself. For Miro, for instance, you could use 3 boards before you had to pay, or some number of people. Maybe there's 2 people could join your board before the 3rd person you had to pay. And different, we can talk about that subsequently, but different businesses end up trying to find out different thresholds for when it really makes sense for people to get involved. And then easy to buy and easy to share with others, to invite people to a Miro board without making them register with 22 pieces of information that a marketing team is going to try to optimize.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want me to pause there before I get to the other?
So, I really want to talk about this idea of PLG works very well when you have a customer segment that wants to educate themselves, right? And you experience that at Atlassian. I mean, a developer typically doesn't, stereotypically doesn't really want to talk to a salesperson. They sort of have the desire and the ethos to go and educate themselves, and then at some point they're going to upsell, right? And there are other sort of products where that's the case. Where isn't that the case? Like, have you does it sort of happen when you've got like more complicated enterprise sales? And what happens in more complicated enterprise sales where you might have multiple customer segments or different buyers, or more complicated process where that's not going to work so well?
Mm-hmm. The PLG motion works best in this somewhere where it's easy and fast to land, somewhere where an individual can read, try a product, pay with their credit card, start using it, and they don't need approval from their boss. So the whole cloud movement generally allowed PLG to happen. Like, remember the days when your IT department would give you a computer that was locked down, and then you couldn't even kind of load your own software onto the computer? Now that there's websites and people can try their own thing, every department can sign up for something that's easy for them to use and try it before they get approval from procurement and security. So it's really, once you have a larger, more complicated sales cycle, that PLG can be more difficult, and where people add in sometimes evangelists, sometimes customer support, sometimes sales reps. There's different models for the combining kind of some sort of sales and PLG motion. But large sales with larger companies, maybe there's a procurement person, maybe there's a business buyer that's not going to test the software and doesn't actually care about all the details. They're going to let their team try it out and tell them. That's where it gets more useful to kind of triangulate. The other place that sales becomes necessary, there was one client at Atlassian where Jose Morales, who was the head of all sales and field and partner, even though it was not traditional sales, went to this very large Fortune 500 company and was like, "Do you know you spend $250,000 a year with Atlassian?" And they were like, "No, we don't. You're not even an approved vendor." And he just pulled up the individual credit cards from all over the org of all these teams and people who had been buying Atlassian, and then said, "Hey, do you want an enterprise license deal?" And they were incredulous that much money was being spent in their org. They didn't even know. So again, where you're connecting different departments, or trying to kind of facilitate more tops down rollout of a product versus bottoms up, that's where the sales team can help get bigger deals and
that's a great segue
companies.
to the third bucket, the viral bucket. So I'd love for you to walk through that single player to multiplayer mode.
So the founding concept of Atlassian's pure PLG, let's call it, was around efficiency. We didn't want to throw bodies at a problem. We didn't want to throw money because the mindset was different. It wasn't a growth at all costs story. It was many more years to IPO than some of the greatest high flyers. There weren't investors that needed their money back right away. So there was this patience of allowing growth at a lower cost. And that meant a huge reliance on organic traffic, which we fed with evangelism and content marketing strategies. But also the primary driver was product people like. They'd like, and Jira was the cornerstone, even though some developers like when people roll their eyes at the frustrations of getting a Jira ticket. But some team would open it up and start a ticket project, and then other people would have to file their tickets through to get what they needed from IT. And then other teams would say like, hey, you know what? Actually, marketing could use a ticket structure because we get all these inbound requests and we need to process them separately. So the act of having something that a single person can use and then invite other people in to join. And then the irony of not having a sales team is the people who are using the software product have to advocate for it to get other people to use it with them. If you love Miro and everyone else is like, you know what, Word documents are fine for our meetings, you go out and try to say, but no, there's this cooler things that you could do. And I've set up this template and I'm going to run our offsite with it. And you start to show people through your passion of how it is. Like, that's way better than any salesperson, because it's this word of mouth where people are talking to their friends and talking to other people at their company, and they're doing the selling for the company. It's slower and you don't have as much control, but it's kind of a more consumer-ish model of distribution.
I'm going to stop sharing for now, but that's fantastic. I mean, we were talking a little bit about this. We call this motion the PLG motion, but what you hit on just then was it's really user-led, right? Like you're getting a person to a place where they're educating themselves. They have a problem. They Google the answer to the problem. They try out a product. That product in the first like N minutes, let's say 5 minutes, really solves their need. It's easy enough for them to get up to speed and to understand it. They use it. They produce a product, an output from that piece of software, and then they're equipped to be able to go and convince other people. And so the sale is actually, at least in the early days, is happening through those users, because the product and the documentation is educating themselves.
Right. And I love that term. I feel like you might have coined that yesterday, the user-led. Someone else I talked to last night was calling it customer-led. But it's really selling to people how they want to be sold to instead of how you want to sell to them. Like, we want to capture their email so we can email them. We want to call them with an SDR so that we can prove it was a good marketing lead. We want the SDR to book a meeting for the sales rep because we pay these people a bunch of money and we want them to have enough meetings. Like, the sales rep wants to close it in this amount of time by kind of forcing what we think the timeline is. And the product led, or actually one company I talked to last week was calling theirs customer service led, because they feel like just giving a fantastic experience is what's leading the sale, and just giving the information that they need when they need it freely and letting them navigate till they become a hand raiser and say like, now I want to talk to a sales rep. Again, you have less control, and there might be drop off. There might be someone who just gets distracted and doesn't keep doing it. And if you'd called them 15 times with an SDR, maybe they would have continued. But the inverse is they have this really delightful experience. And you get customers that are happy about it and not irritated by the sales process. Like, I hate getting called by SDRs. They call me all the time, and I try to be really polite, but generally I just screen my calls and don't answer.
Well, you nailed. So Raphael asked this question, right? Does PLG mean that you need a strong customer success team and a strong onboarding journey? And I think, the answer to that question is absolutely. You probably actually need a much stronger one, because you need the customer able to do a lot of the work as opposed to an account executive managing that process all the way through.
Yes. And so the biggest thing about PLG, and I think Julia asked, or I'm sure, sorry, I'm kind of glancing at the questions, but it's not a marketing strategy. It's a company strategy, because every department does different things to be oriented around how is there an automated process to serve the most people possible without using humans unless absolutely necessary when it adds value. And that's a different orientation, right? Like, when I was in enterprise sales, my favorite person was my sales engineer, because the product didn't quite work right. And so I needed him to fake it for the sales deal. And then after I sold it, I had to work with the support or the consulting team to like do some custom code on top of the product to make it work. And then the support team to make it work, right? So we threw bodies at software problems in a in a really effective PLG motion, you do have a good support team, but you actually, hire more people to have a better support community. And like people in the community are answering questions because either they're passionate or, in the case of really successful PLG companies, they've built a marketplace. So Atlassian has a really thriving marketplace. And in fact, I'm an advisor to the top Atlassian marketplace vendor named AppFire, who provides like 55% of the products within the Atlassian ecosystem to add on in your Atlassian. And so this company, AppFire, and many of the companies they've acquired were the top contributors to our support community, offering tips and troubleshooting and workarounds and add-ons and integrations. So it's about a mindset of engineering, sales, marketing, trying to make everything automated so that people have a better experience. So yes,
Yeah,
on
and
the customer support.
Martin
But
just reaffirm what you said. He said at Elastic, they concentrated a lot on community, and you see that motion inside of open source where you got a lot of people kind of effectively helping the company's customers just to generate goodwill and because they believe in the technology and being empowered by the product, right? So that can happen both inside the company with customer success, but like you said, it can also happen with a community of people who are really excited about whatever the product is.
And it changes who you hire to do the roles. So one developer, really successful developer company, PLG, I've talked to, had evangelists as their first SDR touch. So if anyone was kind of going through a process, someone would reach out and be like, hey, did you have trouble downloading the pack? Like, did you try these customizations? Or like someone who understands the technology, talking to them about the technology, not talking to them about the pricing and packaging and contracting. So yeah, open source is a great spot for that.
A lot of companies start PLG, right? So like the open source companies, they start with developers. Atlassian started with developers. At some point, many of these companies move up, and now they're starting to manage two different products, two different pulls, right? Like there's the classic PLG motion, and then there's the sales-led motion. Each of those exerts a different force on the product team and the marketing team. Some companies are starting with enterprise sales and kind of moving into PLG. I think we're sort of in a place where it's difficult for many companies to go into that journey, and it's a multi-year process. Are we sort of still figuring that out? Like, are we in a place where there's actually a playbook yet, or have you seen companies do this successfully, or is everybody sort of struggling with the same tension?
Should I admit on the open internet that I woke up at 6 a.m. on Monday being like, how am I going to answer this question? Everyone is struggling. And then yesterday I was like, I got to do it. I called like 5 of the like top PLG CMOs in Silicon Valley and was like, I need you tonight, 10 minutes, give me 10 minutes.
Amazing.
And they all called me back, which felt like as nice of a compliment as your compliment at the beginning. So all my important peeps called me back and we chatted about it. It's the biggest problem in tech right now. And the problem is almost every PLG company might start in kind of some sort of SMB mid-market space where they can get a lot of momentum. But ultimately, they're going to move up market because up market is a bigger expansion opportunity in each account, like, more revenue, longer contracts, an opportunity to add more products, right? PLG works great for a land product. Atlassian tried to sell multiple products at once through the PLG, and it was not that successful. We went back to having a single land product and then an expand motion either online or through sales reps. So everyone, even kind of HubSpot and Freshworks and the folks who have like made their whole big growth in early stage companies move up to enterprise. And then lots of enterprise companies boards or advisors are telling them like, you got to do this PLG thing. It's so cheap, like get companies cheap. But there's an inherent tension because they're different strategies and there's an investment trade-off. And the investment trade-off is really significant. One of the companies I worked for had been really successful in PLG, tried to add enterprise, brought in some like big enterprise execs, but hadn't invested fast enough and far enough in engineering. And so ran into really big financial problems because they didn't have user-based administration rights or group-based administration rights. They didn't have some of the certifications that you need for the some industries with bigger legislative responsibilities. All of these things that enterprises need are features engineering must build. And to have a great PLG company, you need engineering to keep trying to like surface aha moments in product, to surface feature suggestions in product, to like take any friction out of that viral sharing of the product, to make more impact earlier in their first 5 minutes. So the investments that you make are causing almost all companies I know doing both to have friction in the middle.
Here's an interesting question. So Anita asks, I'm trying to distinguish between self-serve and true PLG. Is there a difference, Carilu?
I love that. Well, self-serve is what every company can take from PLG. So you can be an enterprise sales company and decide to put a really high functioning demo on your website instead of requiring someone to book an hour meeting with a sales rep to see the demo. So I think that the world is moving towards self-service because people are used to getting what they want on the internet and doing their research. The stat last year, a couple of years ago, was that even in enterprise sales deals, prospects do 75% of their research online before getting into a conversation with the company. So I think self-service is a huge aspect of it. PLG is self-service, but I guess to the extreme, right? Like in a pure PLG, you don't want, again, you could not talk to Atlassian unless you spent more than $10,000. You researched online, you bought online, you supported through an online community, we sold additional things within your company online, you bought it with a credit card. It was really 100% self-service. So there can be self-service that's not PLG, but PLG is self-service.
I think the other characteristic that's really important is, and I think about a lot of PLG companies, they're landing with an individual and then they're using that individual in order to educate and convince a larger buyer base, either like knowingly or unknowingly. So in that example you mentioned before at Atlassian, where a big customer is spending $250,000 a year, there might have been 50 or 100 different installations of individual self-serve, but the PLG motion was the combination of all those different credit card clients, and then it's being coupled to a sales process, right? And that would I think would be different than just a pure self-serve model where it's just a single credit card and there's no expansion behind it.
Kind of adding on to my answer from before, the biggest point of friction that marketers, CMOs feel is where the line is to hand off things to sales. Like, when is sales helpful at getting more revenue? So some companies have like a company size, like over 250 employees and maybe more than 25 instances of a PLG purchases. Then a sales rep can go in and talk to them because they've already shown interest. They're big enough that it might matter. One company was even higher, like companies with, they'd only send in a sales rep to someone with more than 1,000 employees, a company with more than 1,000. And it takes a lot of diligence, because if you overhire on sales, you have all these noisy bird mouths to feed. And sales can be brutal at telling marketing they're not getting enough leads. And marketing wants, if you care about unit economics, you don't want expensive sales reps to spend time with low cost or low value SMB opportunities that could be self-service. But if there's too many sales reps, they kind of start to, I always use a negative word, but harvest from the early stage pipeline that's not really as developed, because they just need to do their job. They're paid to do their job. So that accurate planning to not overhire on sales, if you want to be diligent about unit economics on the PLG, is the most important success metric of that handoff.
That makes a lot of sense. So we have an audience member from Clavio who asks, is PLG, let's see, I just lost the question. Is PLG viable in a case where there's like a small number of users within a company who care? Like the developers in Atlassian is like 35% of the sales of total payroll, right? So it's a pretty significant portion. let's say SRE, right? Site reliability engineering. That's a tiny fraction of the employee population. Do you think a PLG motion would work better there, or an enterprise sales motion? Do you have a sense? I guess since there's not that much expansion.
Yeah. It's tricky if you don't have there was some product, and I can't remember exactly what it is right now, but they were running a PLG motion, and it was really a onesie twosie. And so in the onesie twosie situation, it's just hard to get enough momentum. And I'm forgetting which company this was, but there was also some sort of reason that the users didn't want to share it, like it became a competitive advantage. So they didn't want to speak publicly about it, and they didn't want to share it. They just wanted to buy it and use it. And so that really lacked the virality that you need to get revenue momentum. The other thing that I would consider is the selling price. So a lower average selling price is an easier PLG motion. If there's not a high bar to make a decision, you can buy it on your credit card and like, okay, I lost $1,500 for the year, but that's like a rounding error. If you're trying to land with like 50,000 or 90,000 or $100,000 deal, you usually need a sales rep to help jump obstacles or convince them of that value that they won't have realized already.
That's fascinating. Okay, so let's say you've got one motion today, you've got like a PLG motion, and then you want to move into enterprise, or you've got an enterprise motion and you want to move into PLG. A lot of companies today try to do that in the existing org structure, right? And they say, well, we're going to hire a growth PM, and we're going to find this person from this background, and we're going to do that. But as we talked about before, like, this is really like PLG is a CEO level decision, a board level decision, it's a strategic level decision. How do you think about like the org structure that, and I know this is still being kind of developed on the fly, but I'm curious, like, do you think separating out the team is the right way of going about it? We talked, alternative strategies. Kenny Van Zandt, who built the go-to-market at Asana, talked about this like flywheel model where the account executives were only allowed to call on leads that the product had generated, and that was sort of a way of aligning it. Have you seen any patterns in terms of organizational design on what works if you're trying to do both at the same time?
Yeah. And I'm going to call out, I don't know who it was, but at Klaviyo, we described ourselves as a product-led company. That is absolutely right. So I don't think that you can have a PLG SWAT team to be a successful PLG company. You could experiment with a SWAT team, and you need some engineers and some growth hackers and some product marketers. But to be effective, it goes through everything. I mean, it's core to pricing and packaging. It's core to partnerships. It's interesting because at one point at Atlassian, we did fork organizationally to move into cloud because we needed there was so much to do to support the legacy business that we weren't moving as fast as we wanted in cloud. So we forked the product and we forked the teams, and we had a team that was really focused on it. I can imagine how in the future, companies that are really trying to do both could have like a forked org that serves SMB and PLG and enterprise and has, product overlap or is developing on the same product, but it needs so much focus from the different teams to do it well that it's not a small SWAT team that's just like under the marketing department.
And in your Atlassian example, did the cloud team has it continued to be separate, or at some point was it merged into the overall org?
It continued separate for a long time, and now, increasingly cloud is such a big part of the overall revenue. Like the engineering forking was particularly focused on like moving faster with new features without having to kind of hold on and support all of the other platforms and versions.
Yeah, that's right. Because you're kind of catching up. You've got this existing product that's super feature rich, and then the cloud team has got to basically be more nimble to get at some point to get to close to feature parity. So maybe it makes sense. I mean, it sounds like it made a lot of sense.
So I think it makes sense like to have a PLG engineering team in the engineering org. Like the engineers need to be aligned to the architectural decisions, to the different services, to the security rights. Like the head of engineering needs to be thinking about PLG and non-PLG versus having like 2 or 3 engineers that are adding some hacks in from some other department without core influence.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we got so one of the 5 pillars was around experimentation, right? I think it was pillar number 4. And the idea is like, You're ingesting lots of data. It's clearly a funnel optimization problem. PLG, you need end users in the millions because your conversion rate is probably going to be single digits, which is kind of, if you're at 4 or 5%, your top quartile. Minami asks, how do you think about the data? Like, do you need a data team within a PLG organization? Have you seen that structure before? What are the best companies doing?
Yes. I think data is the most important part because basically that's your knowledge about what works and doesn't and your means of increasing revenue. So increasing your conversion rate by a percentage point could add hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars if the volume coming in is significant enough. So I had said that I thought one of the top objectives of our top pillars is a testing mindset. So at Atlassian, everything was a testing mindset. Like a new feature, sometimes we kind of fake build a new feature and see if people used it or clicked on it before we'd build it all out. In the marketing team, we would run all tests constantly with landing pages, which landing page gets people through. In the login, like originally we had 20 fields when you registered to try. And we did this massive, it took like a year and a half, like which fields cause people to drop off, how many fields is optimal. I think in the end, we ended up with 3 fields down from 25 to totally reduce friction to see how you get the most people through. We did this big test about credit card.
Yeah.
Should you fill it out at the end of 7 days or the beginning of 7 days? And it turned out that you didn't drop off enough people to make it punitive to have them do it at the beginning. But if they did it at the beginning, then you never lost them at the end because it just went auto into renewal. We tried out 30 days versus 7 days versus 3 months for the length of trial. It was like anything I wanted to do, Jay Simons would say, how can you test it? So the data team was one of the most important teams. And in fact, the woman who led our data team has gone on, Archana Agrawal has gone on to be the CMO of Airtable and on the board of Zendesk and MongoDB. Her knowledge is so valuable. And actually, when I talked to her last night, when she called me at the end of her day, I was saying, it's this, everyone is struggling with this intersection. And she said, Carilu, it's a systems, data, and process issue. Like there's just so many variables that people need to plan that they don't take it seriously enough, so they run into these problems. So absolutely, the data is one of the most important things. And we had PhD data scientists and a really like over-invested team because that basically was the sales team at scale.
That's interesting. I mean, because you're right. Like if you're operating a huge funnel, you get a couple percentage points improvements on the conversion rate that can materially lift bookings like 30, 40, 50%. On a new bookings basis for years.
For years.
Yes.
It's compounding, right? It's not like you fix like sales enablement with the sales reps that quarter. It stays the same and keeps performing year after year. And so part of the flywheel of Atlassian, even on the content marketing and SEO, for instance, the number one performing asset for me as the head of marketing ahead of the IPO was a 7-year-old blog written by a product marketer about Agile. And it had just gotten so much SEO juice that 7 years later, it was still the highest performing asset that we had for demand gen.
That's incredible. Okay, awesome. Okay, this is a good sort of wrapping it up question here from Chris, who asks, he's got a $50 million ARR business. He wants to move to PLG. What are the big steps? What do you do first, second, third, fourth, and fifth?
I think you do a lot of user testing to see how the users use it and if they can find delight by themselves just in using it versus having a demo or having someone describe the value. I think it all starts there with the product. And then I think it moves into adding aspects of self-service. So, how much of what a sales rep says to a person to overcome the obstacles about competitors or how it's going to work, or you basically have to take the whole sales process that you would have mapped out and put it online so people can find it and use it and solve their problems. And then you have to make the demo. There's a couple models. There's the freemium where they just use something for free. There's a trial where it's like 7 or 30 days and they get into it. There's kind of this hybrid between them. I don't know, is there another PLG model that I'm forgetting there? But you need some way that the people can use the product themselves and buy the product themselves. And I think those are the core aspects. And then all the other things, the evangelism, the content marketing, the community building, the testing mindset, those are all what you build on top of this like core customer experience from I have this problem, I search the internet and find you, I read all about it, I sign up and try it. It works really well for me, so I buy it. It's on a subscription model, so I keep paying. And then I tell other people that they should use it with me because it's working so
That's
great.
Interesting what you said. I mean, there's clearly we know what the funnel and the life cycle is for a customer on the sales process, right? Like Salesforce has got the 5 stages. Everybody's kind of got their own sort of derivative of that. And I love what you said about looking at that and trying to map that onto, okay, if the sales process is completely embedded in software, who's responsible for what piece? Or, in the education component, marketing is responsible for the lifecycle marketing, right? You just signed up. Here's how you use this product. Here are the templates. Product is responsible for funnel optimization to make sure that the product and engineering that people can move through the product in a really effective way. Customer support, also sort of needs to be there. And so, figuring out like who's responsible for what.
You're trying to automate everyone's job.
You're automating everybody's job.
I'm sorry.
No, please. That's exactly the point.
Automate everyone's job.
That's a wonderful way of framing it. That's a really wonderful way of framing it.
Which is really hard, right? I mean, people don't want their jobs automated. They feel like they're adding a lot of value. But if you can continue to automate people's jobs, then you can have those people go look for new places to add value, which is this testing mindset. I mean,
no, I think,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think people have to be more flexible in a PLG business because the data is going to tell you how it is. Like you can't be, there's no faith. There's only data.
I love it.
Like this isn't working.
That's absolutely right. Okay, we got a couple more questions from the audience. Michelle asks, how do you decide between a freemium strategy or a free trial? Do you just test? Yeah.
Test it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Test it. I mean, different products work in different ways too. But again, for us, the trial period, 7 days was long enough to kind of mess around with it. And after 7 days, people just dropped off and time killed the deal. So we could have given it to them for free forever, but we found that the trial period gave this kind of trigger end. At minimum, you'd have to sign up for a trial again, right? But I mean, there's like tons of great companies that have been built off of freemium. I think they're both workable models.
I surveyed 600 companies in 2020 around free trial and surveys. I'll put that in the chat later on. But the data across those companies was consistent. Like you really wanted shorter trials, did not decrease conversion rates. You wanted to collect the credit card up front. That was super important. And then on the conversion rates, you really wanted feature gating was super important to kind of figure out like, okay, I'm in a free bucket. And if I want to upgrade, I'm limited by what you said before, right? Carilu, like Miro, the number of whiteboards, all of a sudden, like I need to share. There's some feature where the product that I've created within the application, now I need to make it viral. And so at that point, the tax makes sense, right? The pricing structure makes sense. Yeah.
It's easier to do the feature gating earlier in a company than later, and it's easier to do PLG earlier than later because you might take a hit on some of the revenue in the short term to get the revenue in the long term to align the customer's value to your value, right? Like if you get an enterprise sales license, when I worked in enterprise sales, we called it shelfware because the CDs literally sat on the shelf. But there's a lot of things that people buy that they don't use. Whereas if it's tied to features or usage levels, what they pay for is aligned to how they use it, which is awesome for customer experience. But it can be hard if you're changing your pricing over in this period where you lose some of the revenue of things they weren't using. That's an interesting
point. I mean, do you think if you start a PLG company, you have to be more patient with your growth? Because you're building a compounding engine. And so at the beginning, you look at like compound interest, it looks linear. And then all of a sudden it starts to spike and you get this incredible curve. On the other hand, like if you hire an account executive or a sales team, you've got a 6-month period and then everybody's sort of expected to be producing, let's say, a $700,000 quota for a top quartile AE. And so you have this like more of a staircase model as opposed to, so do Do you need more patience? Do you need a lot of patience when you're looking at PLG because you're testing and sort of waiting for the compounding to kick in?
I think so. I don't know. I go back around on this because I worked for Atlassian, which was bootstrapped coincidentally because my friends work there. And then I work with 1Password. They were an Excel portfolio company. They're both profitable. That's a core value. I want to say that Atlassian might have been like 13 or 14 when we IPO'd. 1Password is 12 years old. And like, I can't, and so because the value is efficient growth, right? There's like lots of ways to spend money and grow faster, and that's not the core value. And so I think that if you can't be patient because you have investors, which is almost all growth companies that take VCs, or even worse, PE, that have like a really short time horizon, don't have the ability to kind of wait for organic to go into momentum and to say, you know what, I know there's deals out there and we're not going to go after them. Or, you know what, I know we could charge more, but we're going to charge less so that we can reduce friction and get more people on board and then monetize them with additional products and renewals and upgrades. I mean, the net dollar retention number is really the thing to look at for a PLG company, because that's where they're making more of their money than upfront, because they can't charge the most upfront or they won't get the most people through the door.
That makes sense. Bill Bench on previous office hours, he had this, I asked him like, hey, what's an interesting prediction in the world of software that you would offer to the community? And he said he thinks we're going to consistently see 200% NDR in companies because of PLG, right? You start at these like very, very small lands, and then over time, you basically have a bunch of bank accounts. I mean, these customer accounts that then grow at these massive rates. What do you make of that prediction? Do you think that's likely?
I heard him say that. I'm a super nerd. I keep this like running spreadsheet of everyone's NDRs, and Snowflake's is the highest at 167. Did they hit 172 one year? So I don't know how we get to 200, but I love it as a key performance indicator, because I think it's a leading indicator of a company whose stock you want to buy for the next 10 years, right? People love it. They're buying more. It's hard to game that number because it's a longer term number. I hope so. And when there's someone with 200, I would like to go work there. Call me up and I would love to be your marketer. Because like the secret of marketing at Atlassian was that in some ways we were harvesting. Like, how do you harvest more effective? How do you like remove all the bullshit out of people's way versus trying to throw more things at them? Like, there's nothing worse than the market right now, where every company is struggling and every sales team and CEO is telling the marketers, like, get more leads, get more leads. And like, the more you thrash around with money or like effort versus user driven desire or customer driven desire, it's just a lot of effort and money that may not convert. And that's a hard place to be in.
Carilu, I want to thank you so much for your time. I learned a ton today. I learned about the importance of a sales team in cross-selling in PLG motions. I learned that many different companies are struggling with this tension between PLG and enterprise, and you really need a lot of patience. And I have to say, I think the 5 pillars that you put together for PLG are just absolutely right on the money. We're so grateful. Thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think that it's an exciting time for people to learn to do both. And there's a lot of good times ahead of us to innovate in this market and think about how we can be more efficient, whatever our sales methodology
Fantastic. Thank you so much to the audience, for everybody. Your wonderful questions. Please keep on the lookout for the next set of office hours, sometimes in the next couple of weeks. All right, everybody. Take care. Thanks so much. Bye, Carilu.
Thanks so much. Bye.